I did think you'd find it interesting that the only two parts, this is a picture of the interest rate you would earn if you invested in 3-month Treasury bills from 1934 to 2013. Look at 1934 where the chart actually starts, the blue line. Pretty close to zero, isn't it? Where are we now all the way at if you go to the other end of that chart, the rightmost end, where are we? Back to zero. What do those two periods have in common? One's the Great Depression, the other's where we are now. Kind of an interesting observation. Now, some people have said, I believe the ex-Speaker of the House was one of them, that, let's go to the next one, that the President doesn't need Congress to raise the debt ceiling. He can take care of that on his own. In fact, the Default Prevention Act of 2013 that I mentioned a minute ago contains a provision that allows the President to do just that between now and February 14, I believe it is, without coming back to Congress. And if Congress wants to disapprove, it takes a 2/3 majority in both houses to disapprove. And then I noticed that a couple days ago I saw a story that there had been a new bill introduced. It's called the Pay Our Bills Act of 2013. I don't know, that sounds good to me, doesn't it to you? Pay our bills? Well, I'll tell you that the act was sponsored by Charles Schumer from New York and Barbara Boxer from California. Do you think it has to do with paying bills? You need to be on the lookout for this bill because I believe you're going to be hearing about it. What this bill would do is to make that transfer of authority from the Congress to the President permanent. So any future president could just raise the debt ceiling anytime he wanted to, and it would take 2/3 majority in both houses to override that. But what the ex-Speaker was referring to, and the reason she said that is the 14th Amendment, Section 4 of the 14th Amendment. The validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. So through some tortured reasoning, they've concluded that if you prevent them from issuing more debt, you're somehow questioning the validity of the initial debt. And so the President should be able to raise that debt ceiling and borrow more money even if Congress doesn't want him to. Now, let's go to the next one, Cindy. There's been a lot of talk recently about the Affordable Care Act. And so I wanted you to think about the intellectual pedigree, the bloodlines, the heredity, the family tree, if you will, of state-run medicine. Because I've heard the story that, well, there's no sense in fighting like Cruz and Lee did. We just need to let Obamacare go and it will fail so spectacularly that then the public will turn against the Democrats and the Republicans will take over and they'll make everything right. I call this the let it fail theory. Now, I can tell you this. I don't know what is going to happen, but I do know this. I studied the Soviet Union and the Soviet economy and the Chinese economy for many years while I was a professor. I'm retired now. And one of the things that I learned is that the Soviet system, although it was inefficient, and although it did not please people, it did not meet their needs, it did not collapse from inefficiency. So if you're thinking that Obamacare will be such a spectacular failure and people will be so unhappy about being denied medical care and losing their health insurance that the whole system will collapse, I think you're grasping at straws. Because the purpose of Obamacare, as I see it, just thinking about the economics of it now, not the medicine. I don't know anything about medicine. The purpose of Obamacare is to put such a heavy, unmanageable strain on the healthcare system that people grow so tired of it and so angry and so bitter that they demand that the government take over the whole system. Single payer is what it's called in Canada and Britain. That's the objective. The objective is not to provide affordable care. The objective is to move us, this is a transition, into a government-run healthcare system. So back to the hereditary. What is the bloodline of government-provided healthcare? Vladimir Lenin put it this way: socialized medicine is the keystone to the arch of the socialist state. You know what an arch is? Visualize an arch made of stones, okay? Those stones would collapse were it not for that keystone at the top, beveled on both sides. Once they put that keystone in there, you can drive trucks across it if you're building a road and you've got a tunnel in there. It's the key to the whole thing. So that's the bloodlines. That's the heredity of it. Next one. And of course, the intellectual father for Lenin was Karl Marx. Karl Marx said, "My goal in life is to dethrone God and destroy capitalism." And that's what Obamacare is designed to do. It's designed to destroy the free market healthcare system. I don't know whether it will or whether it won't, but I'm pretty convinced that that is the goal. To the next one. Another note on heredity. This is Gregor Strasser from the National Organization for the Nazi Party. And I didn't put the date on there. I'm not sure exactly what the date on this is, in the 40s. We nationalist socialists are deadly enemies of the present capitalist system. You could edit that, I suppose, a little bit and say that socialists are deadly enemies of the capitalist system. And we are resolved under all circumstances to destroy this system. So they see the free market, which I happen to love because it's the only system in the world that allows people to make voluntary decisions about their own lives. And when those decisions are made through a marketplace, the results are mutually beneficial. It's not one person wins and one person loses. It's not a zero-sum game. It's the only system in the world that produces net gains for everybody in the system who's participating. You got to participate. Next one. I found this from Adolf Hitler. What good fortune for government that the people do not think. Now, the people that Adolf Hitler was being thankful for are not the kind of people that are in this room, for which I am thankful. But maybe you know some people like this. They either don't understand the situation, maybe they're not intellectually capable of understanding it, or maybe they are and it just scares them. They don't want to hear about it. I don't want to talk about it. It keeps me up at night. I just can't deal with it. So, next slide. That brings us to conclusions. I said there were 4 questions I wanted to answer tonight. Number 1, how's the recovery coming? My answer is what recovery? There is no recovery. If by recovery you mean the standard, normal, customary, traditional series of events that happens after a recession. That is not happening. And as they pointed out at this Federal Reserve conference that I referenced earlier, the reason it's not happening in their mind, one of the reasons, is that the government, through this vast explosion of rules and regulations, has created so much uncertainty that people are not willing to invest, hire new workers, try new products. And so we're basically idling here. America is idling instead of the engine taking off and revving up as it should during a recovery. Number 2, why can't politicians in both parties find common ground? Is bipartisanship dead? Now here's my answer to that, my personal opinion. If you understand that what we have here in Washington and maybe to a lesser extent in Austin and other state capitals, what you have here is a battle between 2 different groups of people. There's one group of people who want to run their lives as they see fit, subject to the general rules of good behavior and so forth. But there's another group of people who feel that you and I are not capable of doing so. We need guidance, direction, and control. And they're attempting to provide that guidance, direction, and control, much to our consternation. And then there's a third group that I think is just kind of along for the ride. They want to be taken care of. So I ask you, how would you compromise with a person who wanted to take away your liberties? What sort of compromise would you be willing to make? And so I think probably the answer is, well, I don't want to compromise. I don't want to give up my liberties. I was made free. Important point, we're not made free by the Constitution, right? God made us free. God gave us the liberties that we have. The Constitution simply identifies the functions that we have granted to the federal government in order to safeguard those liberties. Always keep that in mind. You don't get your liberties from a piece of paper. That would be a hazardous situation to be in. And so basically I would maintain that there is no compromise possible between these two parties. And so I don't want to see bipartisanship. One side has to win. We know who won in the Soviet Union. We know who won in Germany in the 30s and the 40s. But the battle hasn't been decided here, and there's some high stakes. Number 3, how does the debt ceiling represent the impasse over goals and ideas? Well, again, it captures these 3 different groups of people. I pointed out to you that what worries the power structure in Washington is not a default, because we're in no danger of defaulting. What worries them is that the debt ceiling would not be raised, and they would therefore be required to subsequently run balanced budgets every single year. No more deficit spending. And that would make, you can't build socialism like that. You can't advance it. And so that's what worries them. And that feeds back into these 2 main groups of people, those who want to run the lives of others and those who think they're capable of doing it on their own. Next one. Number 4, have the laws of economics become obsolete? I would tell you, I have every confidence that the laws of economics which worked under the Pharaoh are alive and well today. If one of those laws is that at some point a debtor will be cut off by their creditors and be unable to finance their debt and will therefore collapse. That is true. It's happened before. And we haven't done anything to rewrite history. We're powerless to do that. If it was foolish to run too much debt in the past, it's foolish to run too much debt in the future. So, too much debt has always culminated in disaster, and today is no exception. We haven't had disaster yet, but it is possible. And last, the second part of the answer to that question, transforming a free market economy into a centrally planned and controlled society has always produced loss of freedom, output in jobs, such that under a socialist system output will be determined, meaning what kinds of things are produced, will be determined by the state. If you thought about the Affordable Care Act, who's going to determine what kind of medical care who individuals get? The state. The state will make that decision, not the doctor and the patient's family. So that pretty much concludes my presentation. I've given you my answers to those 4 questions. I'm not sure what the time situation looks like. We may be over. I haven't seen this yet. Do we have a minute for questions or not? Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.